Again, verbal POIs, starting my speech in three. Oh no, wait, that's okay. Sorry. Three, two, one. I think Europe has had a large influx in terms of right-wing parties. You see the rise of like nationalistic parties in Italy, in France, in all of these varying countries. And notably then, what Trump's election allows you to do on our side of the house is create not only political change, but also economic change. Extremely proud to propose a few pieces of setup then before starting the speech. Firstly, what are exactly are the outcomes of Trump's election? I think largely they're just extremely radical ideas, right? So pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement, pulling out of the WHO, things like anti-immigration policies and cut tariffs on every country, which, where, when, and how, right? I think note as well how there is an inclination towards more right-wing ideologies. So all of these things are existing policies that right-wing um, parties in status quo are leaning towards, right? Things like anti-environmental movements or things like pulling out of global agreements, moving more towards bilateral agreements rather than things like multilateral agreements, which I think then shows that like to an extent they're aligned in interest, right? The second thing to clarify then is what exactly are the interests of European right-wing incumbents and by extension the metrics of the round, right? So countries like Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, and France, four things that we think largely they're going to want. A, we think they want a strengthening of right-wing ideology. That is to say, things like free trade, open markets, anti-immigration, all of these things that strengthen their local power and also regional power within the EU are likely going to sort of serve their incentives. B, likely they have national interests, so things like military interests, pro-protectionist policies. C, likely they want economic recovery, especially because European countries in general were especially hard hit from proximate wars like Russia, Ukraine that fed the energy crisis, or even like the war in Gaza, for example, where it was largely more proximate to the EU than you know, like other countries, which I think leads to the last part in terms of metric, just in terms of general like wars, right? Uh, Note how Trump largely has been pushing towards the end, like supporting the ending of, the war in Ukraine or like taking over in Gaza, largely meaning that you just generally get more stability that we'll talk about later on in my speech. The first substantive then is quite simple in terms of how you normalize right-wing ideology and strengthen right-wing parties. Few layers of mechanism here. A, we think America dominates the social media sphere, right? So a lot of echo chambers on websites like X or Instagram primarily distribute American news due to the existing saturation or dominance of American social media outlets, right? So for example, you're going to see a lot of like American-centric news or like American-centric news platforms on things like I don't know, your like average news outlet that or because of the like extreme, which leads to the second thing actually, because on like B, know how America is pretty much like the most extremist right-wing country on the planet right now. So I think this works in conjunction with the first mechanism in terms of how you not only have extremely radical ideas, but also because you have that existing sort of position on the global social, like on the global sort of awareness sphere, insofar as that is true, likely a lot of people are going to be able to view the stuff that America does and like necessarily know about what America like is doing in status quo, right? But see, what this means then is that likely the global overturn window in terms of political acceptance has shifted way right? The point at which we see America doing extremely right-wing radical policies, that is when you see a shift towards more accepting more maybe like slightly more conservative ideas. The point at which like the things that America is doing are seen as so radical, like even normal right-wing things are seen as more moderate in comparison to America, which likely then just makes it far more like centrist or easier to like cater towards like sort of bipartisanship in terms of like supporting more conservative ideas. What are the benefits that we get on this? I think there's two spectrums that we want to talk about. Firstly, in terms of the local aspect, right? Because note how this empowers things, for example, like deep state narratives that allows these incumbent right-wing parties to paint themselves as, for example, the real people against corrupt elites in places like Brussels. It allows you to do things like justify your right-wing policies locally. It allows you to do things like justify the fall of the left wing and why exactly perhaps globally there's been a shift towards conservatism, right? I think largely this strengthens the ability for you to stay in power in the long term, to continue getting elected into power, largely because you've become more accepted within general society that is like sort of persuaded by the aggressive things happening in America. But I think secondly, and like more importantly probably, is regionally how this affects incumbent right wing parties, right? And there are five things to note here. A, know how Trump's like skepticism or like wanting to pull out of like things like NATO or the EU and like multilateralism weakens European centrists and strengthens nationalist parties, right? Because the point at which you're at the point at which Trump is skeptical of these large sort of organizations, this weakens these sort of like moderate parties that seek to like go together into these like sort of large organizations, right? Which largely reduces like EU influence and like creates stronger national control over policies, right? Which helps like parties like Germany's AfD or France's National Rally or Spain's like Vox, right? Because critically, this like creates a very global stance towards migration and globalism that like emboldens right-wing parties in the status quo. Before I move on, I'll take a point.
Europe's right-wing politics is drastically different from America's right-wing politics. They're literally competing against one another.
Okay, correct. But because largely these right-wing policies are so radical on the side of like Trump, it makes other things that like countries within the EU do much more palatable, right? But I think moving on, there's also like just the second substantive here in terms of the economic prosperity. And I want to note two things under this. A, know how the trade deals in America have gotten so bad, right? Like how they've 50% tariffs on every country near them, like Canada, Mexico, Colombia. So even though Trump threatens to tariff the EU, he still has to hold on to the EU as a major trade partner, likely because, he no longer has any option, which just means that you're going to get far more favorable trade deals with America, which benefits the economy locally. But B, let's note the possible acquisition of Greenland as well. I think it's quite important because the point at which you're able to tap into the natural resources of Greenland as Trump, as soon as you're able to input more money, in terms of like, digging up all the oil fields within Greenland that are untapped, that is when you're able to improve the economy or inject even more money into the EU. That's when you're able to use these untapped resources because you're proximate to Greenland, right? So you're going to create even more trade deals. You're going to create even more like resource sharing and just general injection into the economy, which actually just benefits like everyone in general, which therefore means that likely Trump's election is in the interest of European right-wing incumbents. Never been prouder to propose.
Right, thank you for that speech. Call upon the leader of opposition here.
Hi, just a quick check if I'm audible.
Yeah, you're audible and visible.
Awesome. Okay. I have two win conditions. The first is that Trump's agenda in the next 4 years will greatly destabilize the economic performance of the EU. This will come primarily through his trade wars and poor handling of Ukraine. Economic performance will hurt the right-wing parties the most, more so than any kind of news coverage. The second win condition is that even if the conditions in the EU stabilize in the next 4 years, America will fail. Trump's stain and therefore like right-wing politics stain on the impact in America is something that will affect the agendas of outright parties in Europe for decades to come. So three arguments. Firstly, on why the trade war will hurt EU consumers. Secondly, on why Trump's poor handling of Ukraine will create economic disruptions. Thirdly, Trump's likely failure in governing America will be a political stain. First argument then, on why the trade war will hurt EU consumers. Very simple. Trump has already confirmed plans on implementing a 25% tariffs from imports from Canada and Mexico, 10% of imports from China. In the last couple of days, he has more or less confirmed the intention to evoke tariffs onto the EU. Brussels has also confirmed the intention to retaliate. The reason why this has to be the case is because for EU right-wing parties, there isn't much of a choice. They campaign on the position of nationalism and strength. So it's politically consistent to retaliate. Otherwise, they get caught out by the left or in opposition at the moment for hypocrisy. So what are the goods that the EU imports from the US at the moment that will be affected? The first thing is just petrol and natural gas. This impacts cost of energy. This likely has far-reaching impacts on both households and businesses because households just cost more to keep themselves warm and businesses cost more to keep themselves running. The reason why the EU cannot swap out US petrol and gas with another partner is that it's not the case that they can like buy this from Russia for obvious reasons, Ukraine, and China is just much less of a reliable actor, and therefore they do not want to be reliant on China. The second group of products is just food. So corn, wheat, almond, pistachio, etc. This just basically impact food prices on the average person, and this is likely to be felt easily because everyone has to eat. The reason why the EU cannot swap it out with other providers is because these are the kind of products that is catered uniquely to the European cuisines. It's not like the case that they can, for example, start importing rice and coriander from China, for example. The last is just arms and other kinds of military equipment. The impact of this is that fiscal spending on military equipment will explode. The reason why the EU cannot swap out to another provider is because most of them are in NATO, and therefore they have to subscribe to a particular military doctrine, which means that they cannot, for example, suddenly just import AKs from China. On the flip side, what are the goods that the US buy from the EU that be affected? The first is agricultural products. Just a lot of things that EU produce to the US. But the reason why the US can swap you out is because the US has just a much more diverse culture, and people are just naturally more familiar with eating cross-cultural food. So it's not really a bad thing that they move towards just domestically produced goods as opposed to pasta from Italy. The second is skilled manufacturing, so pharmaceuticals, cars, etc. I want to note that this is the primary driver of European economies. If it's the case that the US can swap you out, you're kind of dead because you're going to retaliate with tariffs, and they're likely then to swap you out. And the reason for this is because you're not the only manufacturer of skilled manufacturing. So for example, cars can be imported from Japan, from Korea. The US is also allies with these parties instead. So it's unclear why it's the case that you have a comparative advantage here. The end outcome is just clear. I think there's going to be massive inflation. Businesses will fail. Unemployment rate will rise. I'm going to talk about why is it the case that these impacts are very damaging later on. The second impact is that Trump's handling of Ukraine will create economic disruptions. The first level of analysis is that Trump is quite non-interventionist, so therefore there is going to be a need from countries in the EU to increase military spending. Even if it's the case that the spending is not productive, they have to spend because the population, because they've been wrought up by fears of security, are likely to want the government to do these things. But what that also means is that you lose more money towards these kind of spending and less so in for example, welfare and economic subsidies to stabilize businesses. The second and more important mechanism is this. It's not about the conflict itself. It's about stability. If it's the case that we cannot accurately consider to what extent is the conflict going to enlarge, and for how long can the conflict be, how long will the conflict last? What are then the stabilizing effects if it's the case that the government can, for example, increase subsidies insofar as the conflict does not end in the short term? These things decrease economic confidence. So it's not about the bullets being shot. It's about the fact that people just don't know exactly what's going on, and no one can be there to say that they will stabilize the situation with massive amounts of money because they have the ability to just borrow that much money. What that means is that businesses in Europe in general are going to slow down because they want to wait out the conflict. What that means is that economic growth also slow. The last thing that I want to talk about then is Trump's likelihood of failing to govern America, and why is it the case that it's going to be a political stain. I'm going to impact why the stain is important, but I just want to note that this is extremely likely to be true. Trump is already at the moment gutting federal agencies are likely to be vital to the governance of America. Cost of living has already risen from the tariffs. You can see, for example, on Reddit posts about the price of eggs. The impending labor shortages from deportation is likely to be massive because agricultural products cannot be collected because no immigrants are there to work the job, and Americans do not want to work these jobs. In the last term, Biden's already shown you that it took an extremely long time for you to undo these damages. Trump is back with full force, swapping out the entire agency within the government with new people like Elon Musk, etc. OG's case is contingent on the coverage of the US on being positive. I would say that actually most people will explain why is it the case that America is screwed because of Trump's right-wing policies, and why is it, and I'm going to explain later on why is it the case that it's just bad for right-wing policies in Europe. Before I go on, I'll take one from closing. Opening?
Yes, closing can ask a question here.
Go ahead.
Isn't your whole case contingent on these tariffs actually going through, and he has already proceeded out of the tariffs of Mexico and Canada, and they have not gone into effect? He has why would he tariff Europe? Please, you have to prove that.
No, this is factual. It's on the news. He has already confirmed that he has intention to do this. Brussels has also confirmed the intention to retaliate. It's just part of his agendas. And even if you take out this argument, I have other things within. Okay, so why is it the case that these contributions are important? The first thing to note is that most people in Europe are far more concerned with the economy than with identity politics, because actually a lot of people in Europe is liberal. the outright parties came onto power because of the fact that the economy was just not performing well. These are the countries that decolonized much faster than America did, and they're just much more colonial geared. So, like, this is not really an agenda that I want to stand behind. The second is, it's not just about the next 4 to 5 years. It's about the legacy that endures forever. When America always points out to the fact that it's gone down to shitter because of the fact that Trump was in power, every single outright parties from now on will have the left-wing parties pointed at them and say that their agendas are going to be the things that cause the damages in America. That is the kind of messaging that is sent out. I think it's just much harder for them to defend themselves, given that this is then the overriding case study of what happens to a country when right-wing parties take power.
Then level for our speech call for Deputy Prime Minister here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah. I prefer POIs verbally. Starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. LO gives some generic arguments about how the election of Trump is going to fuck over Europe, but never explains to us explicitly why it's going to fuck over the right-wing incumbents in Europe. What we're going to explain to you is specifically why the economic tariffs that are being set by Trump, or the trade war specifically, is going to ensure that right-wing people and people who perpetuate right-wing ideologies in Europe specifically get to entrench their ideologies and make sure that it's something that's going to be long-term. A few responses here. Firstly, when they run basically 4 minutes of trade deals on tariffs of fuel, food, and military, and telling you about how the EU is going to end up losing money, right? Firstly, we tell that, yeah, sure, the tariff is maybe going to fuck over Europe because of the trade wars, but it creates a time of economic crisis. What this means is we're going to explain to you that in times of economic crisis, right-wing ideologies are often the ones prioritized. This is because they prioritize economic development, right? They prioritize things like protectionism and things like subsidies or contractionary fiscal policy that is aimed towards getting the economy to progress, and less on social justice, which is what left-leaning parties often do. But secondly, and more importantly, if they want to talk about how it's going to fuck over the EU in general, we're going to tell you this, right? Right-wing incumbents don't necessarily agree with the EU as in the agreement itself. The EU is historically a neoliberal, pro-subsidies, basically liberal organization that favors pro-immigration and green tech. It is likely going to be something that they are able to weaponize in elections when they talk about the EU and how none of their policies are going to do anything, right? But I think this is more importantly considered in LO. When they tell you that most people in Europe are liberal, we're going to be talking to you about that later on. But most importantly now, they tell you that right-wing incumbents came to power because of economic weakness. We tell you, yeah, sure, that is why even if Trump creates a moment of economic weakness in the EU, it's going to be good for them because it's something they can weaponize in elections when they tell you that we shouldn't be focusing on immigrants and refugees, we shouldn't be focusing on green tech, we should be focusing on the economy, right? It is something that is explicitly more powerful to people on the ground because they can see the effects of what Trump is doing to them. We tell you that it is specifically this moment of economic crisis that's already been considered is something that is going to empower those who perpetuate right-wing ideologies. But secondly, onto how everything is bad in America and how America perpetuates anti-immigration policies, right? Yes, exactly. But if this is true, right, and how America is going to spiral into a bad economic situation, America is not prepared to be self-sufficient, which means in the long run, they will have to turn back to the EU, giving them economic negotiations that are good for those right-wing incumbents, that are good for them to weaponize in the elections and tell you that this is something that's going to happen in the long run, right? Messaging becomes something that is really bad. So the problem is that it falls into the analysis from first, because we explain that Trump's radicalism is so bad that this empowers the comparatively more moderate right-wing incumbent parties in Europe. So even if you want to run that what Trump is doing is being perceived as bad, we tell you that they make people who are also right-wing but run more moderate policies be seen as good. And even so, the right-wing policies in question are something that are more discussed in media, in in like mass media and in the new generation or whatever. By fitting into the window of acceptability, you're able to seem slightly more acceptable, even if you lean towards the right, meanwhile pulling it away from liberal parties in Europe who end up further left. This then entrenches right-wing ideology, which is exactly what right-wing incumbents want. Onto my extension then, what are the main problems faced by right-wing incumbents in European countries, right? If they are ruling countries, they often don't have the economic and political backing for things they want to do. This is simply because of the EU, right? EU historically has been quite biased. Their policies are controlled by the rich countries that are mostly left-leaning. You see Germany and you see things like Sweden. So this looks like the refugee crisis in 2015, where they forced countries to accept refugees when it was something that they did not want. And secondly, this looks like them sanctioning countries who are illiberal. So this looks like Hungary, who was sanctioned after practicing like human rights abuses or something. I don't actually know. And it suffered economically. But what Hungary did was turn to Russia for like help with sanctions, right? But this is where we point out to you that the involvement with Russia is bad for Hungary because Putin likes to meddle even more than the US in the political system of Hungary. So this is where we're going to tell you that the US and Trump specifically has been expressing interest in funding like fossil fuel production. So what we're going to tell you that because the EU doesn't want to fund like fossil fuels and they don't want to fund things that are harmful towards the environment generally, we tell you that it is in the interest of right-wing incumbents to support economic trade deals with economic trade deals with the US. This means that they are more lucrative. There's a higher insurement of energy, right? US has large capital and the ability to mobilize tech. We tell you that right-wing incumbents can use this to guarantee more success. We tell you that the US has an incentive to trade with the US has an incentive to trade with European countries simply because European countries are also rich or do have the oil rigs or whatever and the resources and technology in order to help the US. If we tell you that because right-wing people like fossil fuel and the EU does not want to fund because they're shifting to green energy, this is necessarily something that right-wing incumbents are going to want. Yes?
The reason why right-wing European politicians came to power in the last election is because people voted out the incumbents because they were not happy with the performance of the economy. This mechanism has brought right-wing politicians into power. It can bring them out.
Okay, but you see, right? The problem is not that we're going to vote people in and out based on what the economy is doing. It is about the messaging that you use in elections, right? When the messaging used by left-leaning policies is that they're going to shift towards green tech and be pro-immigration and social justice, compared to right-wing policies that are still pro-protectionism and fiscal policy and helping the people on the ground in terms of the economy, that's still something that's going to win at the end of the day. When it doesn't matter if the economy is doing bad, if people can see that it's not because of you, right? It's because of Trump's election. It's not because of the ruling party. We tell you that they're still going to vote the person into power at the end of the day. So what are the two outcomes at the end of this? Number one, we tell you that if Trump keeps favor, it is better for us because it's a normalization of right-wing ideologies. There's something that is discussed and something that is turned over and something where people are more likely to be receptive towards. Your ideologies become more moderate in comparison to Trump. But secondly, we tell you that even if Trump loses favor and is received negatively in the long run, because of the overturn window, your policies still seem more moderate in comparison. And even if at the end of the day you don't buy any of that, you have to accept that what we said, which is the forms of economic crisis that side opposition wants to push, is useful for right-wing incumbents that specifically came to power because of the economy and their economic policies. As long as the economy is the focus of the election, right-wing incumbents are going to win, and we want to keep it that way.
Call upon the leader of opposition here.
Yeah, hi, can I check that I am both visible and audible? Okay.
Yes, you can.
Just for tab, is it okay if I don't consent to this round's filming? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yes, you are.
Great. Okay.
Okay. If we look at the Trump's inauguration of this year, we can see the people that were there. First row, Jeff Bezos, owner of Washington Post. First row, Zuckerberg, owner of Facebook and Instagram. First row, Elon Musk, owner of Twitter. Panel. Those are people that are extremely close to Trump. Those are people that are likely to help Trump spread right-wing propaganda towards European nations, which will increase the power of right-wing parties overall in these nations. What will come from side proposition is very simple. Why? By electing of Trump, right-wing propaganda will spread much more. But let's look to just make sure there wouldn't be any confusions. Let's see what OG is running. They tell you when America gets right-wing, it affects social media consciously. It makes people believe that that's the normal, that's something that should be like that, etc. Well, we will tell you, it's not just like the effect of Trump being elected. It's the fact that Trump will purposefully spread propaganda towards Europe to make right parties much more much more stronger, which is inherently something much more effective. Okay. What are the problems with our opening cases? Two main questions that they never answer. First of all, why just because America is doing it, it's making people, Europeans willing to follow this example, right? And especially if you see that, like in Bulgaria, pretty much everybody sees, like, or at least a vast majority of people sees Americans as uneducated, for example. So you don't want to follow their example. But also, when you see France and UK that are left wing, who are you going to trust? USA, France, or UK? We never know. The OG never proved to us. But second problem with their case, how we know if I see the radical Trump policy that I will be like, oh yes, Melanie is much more rational. He's much more to the centrist. I would vote for them, and I wouldn't choose to vote for, I don't know, for the left party, for example. Again, I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm saying that it's not proven to the extent in which I'm sure it will happen. It's simply uncertain. Their case simply is not strong and effective. Bottom line is, if I prove to you that there will be massive wave of propaganda that will actually make people vote for right-wing parties, we should win this debate. Okay, let's start. What are the Trump's abilities to spread propaganda according to social media? First of all, he's very close to, as I've previously mentioned, he's very close to billionaires, owners of social media. That's very crucial here, panel, right? Like, that's something that an average informed voter knows, right? He's literally best friends with Elon Musk and all those sort of things. But let's give two constructive reasons. Firstly, now he's much more radical, right? He's much more like unpredictable. You would rather to be on his good side in order if he starts to, like, I don't know, put some crazy things or do some crazy policies. Therefore, in moment in which you have that big of a company, you would rather to be on his good side. But secondly, he's winning the popular vote. So you feel like the cultural shift. You feel like the vast majority of Americans support this person. Therefore, you think as an owner of a company, it's the strategic thing to be close to him and to be on his good side. Therefore, those kind of like of owners of social medias are willing to help him and are willing to collaborate together on shifting the algorithm to push much more radical, much more right-wing propaganda and and much more fake news or simply persuasion that right-wing is the right ideology. But what is actually Trump's incentive to do this? Firstly, he already has close relations with Meloni of Italy, for example, Urban in Hungary, etc. He wants to help these right-wing politicians there, right? Like, if we look at the facts, CPAC annual Republican convention took place in Hungary because people see the right model as something worthy and all those sort of things. But second incentive for Trump, he wants to affect the American population, right? Very simple. If I try to make the people that vote for me more right wing in order to re-elect me in the future, and I use TikTok, for example, I will not only affect the American population, but I will affect the European population that is in TikTok as well. But thirdly, people around him also want to have these close ties with some right-wing leaders and all those sort of things. Therefore, there will probably be a lot of propaganda circulating in social media. But also, other right-wing leaders like Putin or Xi Jinping are willing to support him. Why? Xi Jinping wants to trade with America, especially after the tariffs, when he wants to keep some good trading relations because it's major exporting, and it will probably make the tariffs less, or he believes that, so he wants to fix these relations. But also, TikTok make a boom when he was elected, so Jinping is willing to shift the TikTok algorithm in order to again make more people engage with the social media, etc. But Putin, he's already inferring into elections in Eastern Europe. Panel, in Bulgaria, our liberal party constantly accused random people for being Russian spies. And to be completely honest, they might be. So, but also the more nations being right-wing, the less support goes for Ukraine. So Putin is willing to support it. Therefore, there probably won't be, at least there won't be a clash in the ideologies. Okay, a lot have been said, but why this propaganda will be efficient? First of all, the propaganda is presented as news. That's something that you cannot argue with, as something that is literally fact. Two, it uses strong metaphoric and rhetoric, provoking emotions in you. You're not rational when you're reading how, I don't know, gay people are trying to change your gender, for example, or and all those sort of things. Three, it specifically targets groups that are likely to buy into this. Elderly people, red-pilled boys, that are just now building the political opinion and all those sort of things. But fourthly, it is something that you see very constantly, which means like every single day, which affects you so much. Panel, if you don't want that, if you believe that that's the thing that right-wing parties want, please vote CG.
I thank the member, Governor, for that speech. Call upon member of UP. Member of UP, can you hear me? You know you're muted, right?
Can I be seen and heard?
Okay, we can hear you. Yeah, you can be
Cool,
seen
okay.
and heard now.
Keshav going as member for the POAs. Just put it through the chat, do not vocalize. Starting in 3, 2, 1, go. The debate talks about the interests of European right-wing incumbents, which means that these people are still politicians and they're still going to care about the political parties. So the first thing that I'm going to do in my speech is just going to complete the arguments that were left incomplete by OO when they're going to claim that the economy is particularly screwed up at a point in time Trump is now elected and in the US. Why exactly? Is that directly going screwing up these politicians at core who are these incumbents in the first place. One, note that European right-wing leaders often rely on large private investors and business elites for their campaign funding. These investors typically want to back politicians who offer them better economic stability, predictability, and access to global markets. We think at a point in time, Trump is now elected in US and is actually going and running around with his America First policies, combined with the media portrayal that Trump has as a destabilizing force. This raises concerns among European investors among the potential economic instability if the party leader are seen as too closely aligned with Trump in the first place. What this also does is that as European media portrays Trump policies as risky for international trade, security, and economic relations, etc., investors will perceive backing right-wing leaders who align with Trump as a financial risk. We think then investors will pull their financial support to avoid being associated with potential economic quality or isolationist policies that could damage European market for their own global interest then. What exactly does this look like? Note, this looks like how in 2016, some investors were initially drawn to Trump's populist rhetoric, believing that it would lead to taxes and regulation that could benefit their businesses. However, the moment Trump's trade wars and withdrawal from global agreements existed, that resulted in significant economic instability, and due to which businesses quickly started distancing themselves from Trump's policy. Similarly, in 2020, businesses and investors became way too wary of any association with right-wing leaders who were closely aligned with Trump. This looks like how global companies in France and Germany were hesitant to invest in right-wing leaders like Marine Le Pen due to fears of economic fallout from Trump's foreign policies. We think now in 2024, the moment Trump is now elected, European businesses have started going and viewing an alliance with him as too risky due to high cost of trade disruption, potential tariffs, and political instability caused by his unpredictable governance. The impact of all of this are fourfold. One, your loss of investment support for political campaigns, because investors will retract support from right-wing politicians who openly align with Trump, fearing that their investments will be jeopardized due to economic instability or the threat of trade wars. This makes much harder for right-wing political parties to fund the electoral campaigns and political initiatives. Second, your business exit from the market because European businesses might choose to relocate to more stable regions outside of countries with leaders that align to Trump, reducing their economic growth in countries led by right-wing incumbents and further undermining their political legitimacy at all political points in time. Third thing this does is that this huge amount of economic uncertainty existing from all of this, because investors will become increasingly concerned about the economic instability associated with the unrestrained Trump-style approach to foreign relations, and trade disruptions, tariffs, and isolation policy may drive up the production costs and disrupt markets. That leads to reduced investment in the political parties that align with all of these views. This ultimately leads to a decrease in overall economic growth that weakens the political capital of these right-wing leaders. The fourth thing that this does is that the loss of financial backing for the political parties. Without financial backing, right-wing parties will struggle to reach voters, build robust campaigns, and maintain the infrastructure that is necessary for political survival. That is making them more vulnerable to losing elections. And I think that's the most proximate harm that can be reached to these political leaders that can exist in this debate. And we are the only house that goes and talks about. But then let's talk about what European leaders want. They need political stability and not chaos. Notice that one, European right-wing parties gain power presenting themselves as protectors of stability and national interest. Trump's style of governance is different because it is marked by unpredictability, it is marked by conflict existing in US, which directly contradicts this image. Second thing then is that Trump's influence will embolden far-right extremist factions within European right-wing parties that is leading to internal divisions and conflict over ideological directions. This is three, right-wing governments that currently benefit from economic stability and institutional control will suffer if Trump's action creates global instability. The mechanism for all of this are threefold. One, Trump's constant political turmoil in the US will make moderate European voters wary of right-wing populists in their own countries. Two, European right-wing leaders who align with Trump face pressure to go and adopt his extreme policies that cause rift within their own parties. Three, economic and diplomatic instability caused by Trump will make governance more difficult, that is reducing the voter trust in right-wing political parties at this particular point in time. The impact of all of this are then threefold. A, right-wing parties face internal divisions that Trump fuels ideological extremism. Two, voters lose confidence in right-wing leaders as a struggle to balance Trump's influence with their political stability that exists within the state. Three, this leads to long-term weakening of European right-wing movements due to increased association with chaos and instability at this particular point in time. But then, let's talk about the unique extension that the media portrayal of Trump weakens European right-wing incumbents by damaging their image and undermining their credibility. First thing under this, Trump's media image undermines the credibility of European right-wing movements. I have three mechanisms under this. A, Trump is a polarizing figure. His extreme rhetoric, erratic his rhetorics are extreme, his policies are erratic, and his actions are mostly controversial that are often portrayed in media as dangerous and destabilizing. We think the moment two European right-wing incumbents who align with Trump are existing, they risk being associated with these negative perceptions, even if their policies or actions are moderate. This also means three, the media, especially left-wing outlets, will draw parallels between Trump and European right-wing leaders, reinforcing the narrative of far-right extremism and undermining their ability to appeal to broader and more moderate audiences. We think then the Trump effect in media creates a guilt by association scenario that is damaging the reputation of right-wing governments, even if they're not as extreme as in their view or actions then. What are the impacts then? One, this leads to damage to credibility because voters, especially centrists and moderates, lose trust in these leaders, perceiving them as authoritarian or too extreme, which weakens their support base. Two, electoral losses because the negative media portrayal leads to a reduction in voter confidence that is potentially pushing right-wing incumbents towards electoral defeat, especially in a climate of shifting political ideologies where voters are increasingly sensitive to accusations of extremism. This is to three, international diplomatic isolation because associating with Trump's controversial media portrayal can make it harder for European right-wing leaders to foster international partnerships, particularly with democracies and EU allies that view Trump's actions as damaging to democratic values. All of this leads to your voters isolating you. All of this leads to your voters alienating you at all points in time, which leads to lesser amount of votes that can exist. But the second thing I'm going to prove is that how media coverage of Trump intensifies scrutiny on European right-wing relationship with the extremist movement. Because notice that Trump's populist agenda and ties to far-right extremist groups in the US attracts a significant amount of media attention. This means that European right-wing leaders who are aligned with Trump or echo with similar nationalist rhetoric face intensified scrutiny from media, which means them as enabling or sympathizing with extremist movements within their own countries. The media now portrays them as the identitarian movements or neo-Nazi movement and their ties to national rhetoric similar to Trump politics. What all of this does is that this leads to internal party conflict, but moderate voters become increasingly uncomfortable with right-wing incumbents who are associated with Trump and his extremist rhetoric that leads to electoral setbacks for all these politicians. And for all these reasons, I've never been prouder to oppose.
Okay, give me a second. I assume I'm audible and visible. All right. I, as an avid Twitter user, feel the need to remind this debate about the most important communist axiom that exists. I wish no harm upon the American ruling class. My enemy is the American people. It is the absolute truth that people are idiots who have no idea what the hell is going on with policy. I don't know what the hell is going on with policy and I actually follow it. It is incredibly easy to fool people to their social media about what's happening in the world of like not even exaggerations, but like pure untruths. And like it is very easy to sow chaos and uncertainty when there shouldn't be one, which makes it incredibly easy for people to just like alter their beliefs to the absolute insanity, like being anti-vax, like liking business casual outerwear, like I don't know, like I'm trying to think of something stupid. Whatever. Point being, my first speaker already gave a few reasons why propaganda will be effective. I will give even more because I will use propaganda as a rebuttal to a few cases. Firstly, the social media reach is unique because it is such a large part of our day-to-day life, which means people go up to like 6-7 hours on TikTok. I do 7 hours on Twitter daily. Like people do this stuff all the time. Unlike news, which is once a day, like this has incredible reach. Second, it is a mix of entertainment and seriousness. You see a joke, you laugh. Oh, maybe Zelensky is the devil who like wants to drink the blood of your kids. Joke, laugh, right? And like, like as stupid as it is, these memes and dumb stuff just works because the more you laugh and the better mood you are, you suddenly see something serious and you can't differentiate it. And the more you see it, the more you internalize it. Even more so, like all this happens through like charismatic personalities like Joe Rogan, like. Dare I say Jordan Peterson was charismatic before the brainworms, like Ben Shapiro, if that's your kind of thing, I don't know. Like people look at these people and see like an aura of authority because they're widely accepted. Even more so, they're sometimes quite like entertaining. Ben Shapiro had a pretty fun take on the Wicked musical. You know, he was a theater kid, but like. You get hooked by like some weird religious stuff by Jordan Peterson, and suddenly boom, bow, chabow. Like what happens? You're reading about why like globalism is out there to like make your like children trans or whatever, right? And like this is a sudden escalation that like simply works because of the charismatic style of these leaders, and like. A lot of people just don't have the mental capacity to differentiate this stuff. Like even on basic news stories, I have no idea what the hell is happening in Argentina. Like half of my Twitter is about how Milei is like the greatest economic genius of this generation, and the other is talking about how the poverty rates like quite literally doubled. I don't know what's the truth, and I follow politics for like in my everyday life. who knows what the normal person even sees? And when they see a news story again and again and again, and they're used to news stories having authority, they will get fooled, right? So like once that happens, here's the very basic rebuttal to like basically everything on this in this debate around policy and its effects. Who the hell cares if it's the result of Trump's work when you can just blame the Brussels bureaucrats? Like Meloni will come and say, "Oh, these Brussels bureaucrats do nothing all day. They don't know how to handle Trump. I know how to handle Trump." If you think about it, maybe Europe is pretty bad because it shackles us to the lip cooks in France and the lip cooks in Germany, and we need to have a unitary policy with them. But like if we get out of the EU, maybe I can save you guys. Like I'm pretty good friends with Trump. Here's my picture with him, right? And like this propaganda is pretty fucking effective because like people are obviously gonna believe it when they're predisposed to believing right-wing beliefs in the first place, and due to social media, they have like a whole worldview built around them so that they can see this stuff. And like once that happens, like the real reality, like I'm sorry, Risio, nobody gives a shit about like foreign policy, foreign isolation, diplomatic relations. Nobody votes because of that stuff. Maybe people vote because of wars. Maybe, but like nobody gives a shit about foreign relations. That's absurd. Like and like the whole opposition bench relies on like a rationality within the voters that simply does not exist, and we prove why it does not exist. Question PIO, please.
So it seems like right-wing parties can just pay social media companies to spread propaganda. Why is any of this contingent on Trump winning the election?
We explicitly explained in our first speech why people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are far more likely to listen to him now that he has political power, and now that his election has proven that his social media, the conservative social movement, is a large part of the country. Even more so, like Elon Musk is his best friend because like Elon Musk gets to destroy the federal government right now. If he didn't, do you think he would give a shit about Trump? No, he wouldn't. Like he would keep prattling on about how he's the best. Even under the mechanism we forgot, right? Like there are currently national media which the US state gives infrastructure to, Politico, NPR, the New York Times, that sort of stuff. Right now, literally yesterday and the day before, Trump gave this infrastructure to like right-wing spooks like Breitbart and like I don't remember the other ones. Breitbart, the New Yorker rag, whatever the hell. So like obviously the US government has a lot of influence, and also Trump has a much larger interest to like spread his ideology abroad because he needs strong allies, right? And like people around him will encourage him to do that. Beyond that, let's talk more concretely. My first speaker already said why we beat OG. Our case is just better. I like ours more. It's just vibes, guys. Oh, they give us 3 cases. Firstly, tariffs. Trump chickened out on the tariffs on Canada and Mexico for a month. Nothing has been made under. His promise was 100% tariffs. His current tariffs on China 15%. We have absolutely no reason to believe him. Second, the legacy thing, insanely speculative. Please show me that the destruction of the federal government is bad. What are we talking about? No. The propaganda, it is in direct clash to ours. We beat that way. CG, I'm gonna be honest, I don't think they said anything that unique or interesting. We beat on like pure like analytical rigor and like our impacts being very overall good. So please vote CG. Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to thank the government for that speech. Call upon the upwhip here.
Hello, I'd really appreciate a timer if someone can share it.
I'll do it, just a second.
So,
Is it visible?
yes. Thank you. I'll start in a minute.
Ready when you are.
Hello, yes, just starting in 10 seconds. Okay, hello everyone. Akshita Kumar going as the opposition whip. Preferred pronounced she/her. Preferred mode of taking a POI would be via chat after the 5th minute of my speech. And starting my speech on a self count of 3, 2, 1, go. Okay. At the end of the debate, these politician incumbents want their success to shine out to people, right? So, despite of like whatever these policies they go ahead and like align themselves with, the end result is whatever support that they can garner, A, from their investors, B, from their voters, right? So, at all points of time, whatever policies they do go ahead and associate with themselves, they have to do it keeping in mind whatever kind of image that they're putting out to their people, right? Whatever kind of policies that they're engaging with or associating themselves with, they need to ensure that they still have a good solid voter base at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day when they do go ahead and compete in elections, etc., etc. Now, this is something that Keshav extremely fleshes out like extremely well in his entire speech when he gives out all the points of differentiation that there exists and whatever needs that this political party has up till this point, right? So even if these people are going ahead and following Trump's policies, they need to have their own visibility. This visibility is something that we think on their side of the paradigm is extremely hampered. Why is this visibility getting hampered? Because there is an extreme amount of backlash that exists on their side of the paradigm more than the acceptance that they're trying to push forward, right? Which is something that we can again link to whatever argument that Keshav presents on the idea of media, which then directly also clashes with whatever CG's idea of portrayal of media is, right? Which means that we have to go ahead and then prove that why media is more critical over supportive in Europe, because the cancel culture as a whole is something that's strong, that stands extremely strong on like the in like entire European landscape, right? Which then means that it becomes harder for these people to go ahead and display their policy successes. At a point in time, there is incredible amount of influx of critical or criticizing things that are coming for these parties in and of in itself. Why did this happen? Because if there is an excessive and like a very active cancel culture in Europe, which means that there will be more associations as so, which means that Trump's media presence will dominate the headlines and that will overshadow whatever policy successes they're trying to build, which then directly threatens the visibility that these people are trying to portray. Because again, at the end of the day, they do want people to acknowledge whatever things that they have done, which also means that whatever issues that like immigration reform, economic growth, and national security, etc., whatever benefit that these people are doing, it will be undermined by whatever the controversies are being created around Trump, which might serve as a distraction. A distraction is something that these people cannot exclusively avoid on either side of the paradigm, and this backlash and this distraction is something that is getting created on their side of the paradigm, right? Which means that what these people need to do is go ahead and demonstrate their own policy successes without being overshadowed by Trump's media image, right? Which also means that then international media outlets and domestic media outlets, the needs of both these media outlets is for them to go ahead and focus on whatever policies that these EU people are then bringing in separation to whatever Trump is going ahead and pushing forward, given that there is an extreme criticism from the people. Because again, we go ahead and prove why there is more backlash than acceptance, which then again also directly clashes with entire OG's argument upon on like how America dominates social media outlets, etc., but they never go ahead and explain or like even engage with the fact that there will be more backlash than acceptance, and how this social media backlash is something that is going to shape the entire shape the opinion opinions of the voters in Europe. And at the end of the day, these people do need voters. So you cannot afford to have any sort of backlash or association related backlash that there exists, right? Then also engaging with OG's idea of the environmental positions, it is to say that this is something that is a great contention in the ideologies that these European political parties, right-wing policies hold, as well as in like direct correlation with what the US's policy is, right? Because there have been several disagreement over climate policies, cultural agenda, etc., etc. And even if they do are rightist in their policies, they still want to go ahead and preserve sort of cultural agenda that these people are pushing as far as Europe is concerned, which means that they want to preserve the environmental a specific point of time, right? Which then also means that these people are looking for productive policies and no direct direct force or something that will then make these people shape their policies simply because Trump wants to do something else, right? Which means that we take the clash of climatic adaptation as well, given that Europe still focuses on, let's say, moderate emission as a whole, right? They still focus on going ahead and looking forward for renewable alternatives, renewable energy, etc., etc. Whereas Trump is actively for fossil fuels, as proved by as spoken by OG itself. Which means that at a point in time, Trump has this perception or hold to create and influence the environmental policies of European parties. It is just going to aid in whatever sort of backlash that they're going to get on the European side of the paradigm, which means that backlash on a backlash as a whole is something that gets far more worse on their side of the paradigm than it does on ours, right? And then coming on to we go ahead and like we fulfill all the gaps, etc., without like the impacts that land are something that is exclusive on like in our speeches, given that we go ahead and also explain why funding is extremely more important. Funding is the most important thing in this debate for these parties. A, voter base. Second, funding. Funding is more important for these parties, given that they need any sort of financial help to go ahead and run in the election as well, right? Which means that at all points of time, they cannot risk losing their investors, which also means that they have to go ahead and get some sort of stability that there is going to be on the European plane, right? Which even though OO comes and like flashes out in sorts of mechanism, they still lack as to what the impact of this is going to be, which is where we come in and we tell you that this economic instability is going to create a lack of willing investors who are going to go ahead and fund these parties as a whole, right? Which means that at all points of time, our entire argument about getting support from foreign funds and investors as something who will become increasingly concerned and decrease in support is something that stays valid throughout the argument, which then also means that rebuilding our case, we have talked about losing financial political funding to lose infrastructural development, etc., etc., exists at all points in time, which means that European Union right-wing political supporters as a whole cannot risk to lose voters, infrastructural development, and investing, since they need their visibility to go out and compete the elections in the first place. With that, see you.
I'd like to thank you all for what has been a great debate and an interesting one to listen to. Ask my panelists to kindly just head to the judge room. Thank you all. Ask you guys to shake hands, make friends. We'll be back with the OA as soon as possible. Thank you. No,
Sorry,
there's no
isn't
OA.
this yeah. Thanks for the round.